So while we've heard varying perspectives of what it would take to move us forward in this realm, that's also the same concept or thought process that one as a practitioner must take when looking at how to address a social impact assessment and community impact assessment. The topic of this particular session is citizen ingenuity and impact assessment. One would say to use community researchers and to employ methodologies and strategies that are indeed innovative is a plus. My question is to the panel, what other intuitive and ingenuity tools would you leave our participants with to take home to their own communities?
Again, I would say education. I think it's key. Knowing the permitting processes within their states, making the right and appropriate comments when asked regarding the permitting processes, and also finding some advocate within the city government, within your community, who is knowledgeable about the processes as relates to the environmental justice movement, as well as the environmental assessment, the technical knowledge, that have the technical knowledge and the technical skills to assist the communities in their further action.
And Chante,
Yes.
we have 2 minutes.
Yes, well, you know, for over 20 years, I've worked in the immigrant context, and these are immigrants who are voiceless, not voters, marginalized and invisible, and really have no understanding of the system and the policies and how to go to these public hearings and make testimonies and what have you because of the limited English proficiency and also language and cultural barriers. And so for us, as an immigrant rights organization, we work around the issue of voicelessness, and we try to give voice to the voiceless. And so what we do is we do a lot of Know Your Rights workshops. We do have a legal unit in our agency that does a lot of that, helping them understand what they're fully entitled to. We organize and mobilize. So organizing is really fundamental and key, and helping them. I mean, I would actually sit down with my constituents and tell them in Thai and in layman's term what a social contract is, for example. You know, they've never heard of such a thing as a social contract. Social contract is how you hold the powers that be accountable, and how you, as a citizen, whether you're undocumented or legal or not, you're still entitled to basic civil and fundamental rights. And we actually have in Thai the Universal Declaration of Human Rights written up, that we actually educate people on, so that they understand that regardless of the fact that they are newcomers in this country or long-timers in this country, because of those existing cultural and language barriers, because they're invisible, they still have fundamental rights. So.
Thank you, Chancy. With that, I came armed with a list of questions, but the focus of today's session is to make sure that your questions are answered. And with that, I would like to take our first question from the floor. Bernice.
So, whenever my question is for you.
Hold on 1 second, let me get your mic.
So, whenever my question is for you, though I really would love to have questions for all of you. But Winetta, I want to ask you, as a planner who brought not only your professional expertise, but your moral persuasion to bear in the work that you did. I thought you were incredibly humble in your presentation, because you did not mention that in the history of NEPA, the mitigation that you all received and you all secured is the only one in the history of the National Environmental Policy Act to ever come forward, the mitigation plan. And I just think that needs to be But also, in doing your work and in bringing the level of professional acumen that you brought and your credibility, you suffered greatly and fought mightily with the city of North Charleston. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about having courage and sometimes doing what needs to be done.
I guess my background, because I had the technical expertise and the confidence to know that they needed me more than I needed them, and the fact that I was a native of the city in which I worked. And I had a responsibility to not only the community, to my family and my friends that lived in the community. And I just took that attitude that whatever comes may be, I'm gonna do the right thing. Because as a woman of faith, again, I had that moral responsibility to myself and also the constituents. But again, it was a difficult process. And just to summarize what happened personally after that, I was demoted. And I was excluded from participating in further meetings related to equitable development and transportation issues. The executive director of the State Ports Authority at that time was forced to resign after he signed off on the $4.8 million community mitigation plan. And also the community was marginalized into a sense that, for instance, we created a TIF district for the areas that were surrounding the naval base. Well, when the community brought forth their plan and infrastructure request for infrastructure reimbursement, they were not responded to. That was over 2 years ago, and it's still, the city is still considering their request. So while we have made, while we have won the battle, we certainly didn't win the war.
Thank you, Winetta. Our next question from the floor? Okay, lady in the back and center.
I have a question in regards to the Thai community development. So this process took about 20 years in the making, and thinking about marginalized people that are invisible to the community, that may have some of the lowest education and are working harder and all of these things, and was this just a volunteer effort in everyone's spare time? Can you just speak a little bit more on that, and whether there was any initial funding to get this off the ground? And also, secondly, if you could just tell me a little bit more about the survey that you developed.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, of course, when the civil unrest occurred, and that kind of sparked this aha moment that we really need to avoid something like this from occurring in other parts of the city again. And East Hollywood had experienced a very depressed economy historically, and been neglected, and blight and urban decay, and we thought, if it could happen in South LA, it could happen in East Hollywood as well. And East Hollywood is occupied by a very multi-ethnic by multi-ethnic members of the community, Armenians, Thais, and Latinos who've made their home there for the longest time. And so we first wanted to undertake, because the rebuilding need was priority. We had Thai businesses that were destroyed and that were looted and set on fire that we had to help rebuild. So there was a need for first emergency relief. So I went to all the funders and all the people who were marshaling all these and pumping down the pipeline all the resources in the rebuilding effort. And they didn't even know that the Thai community existed, and that we had also suffered and had these adverse impacts. And so I said, well, in that case, can you then fund our first needs assessment so that I could document to you these growing unmet needs and socioeconomic characteristics in a community, and to help you understand that we exist and we have needs, and that we need resources. And so a private corporation actually gave us a grant to first provide the emergency relief, and then to allow us to fund the assessment. And stipends were used to pay for the Thai American college students to go collect data. I trained them and recruited and trained them and all that. But because I was a second-year planning student at UCLA, I also had those resources within my fingertips, using the computer lab to, for example, enter all our data and analyze our data and all the number crunching and what have you. And then we came, and then in that process of the needs assessment came yet another aha moment, which was that, you know, Thai immigrants are economic immigrants. So the fundamental need is access to economic opportunities, opportunities for economic self-sufficiency and economic mobility. And so we need economic development in this community. And so then began the whole idea of campaigning for a Thai town as an economic development strategy. And then that's when we recruited members in the Thai community to become the formation committee, and those are all volunteers. We train them in civics, we train them how to collect data, surveys, and how to collect petitions and send postcards to local city council people, etc. So those were all on a volunteer basis, I think, because it got to a point where they began to realize that they could play a critical role in actually helping build their community for the first time. And so it was an active assertion of their own community consciousness that came about. So this was a very consciousness-raising moment for the Thai community. So,
Thank you.
then after that, of course, we were able to found the Thai Community Development Center, and then get all the funding that we needed to build up the institution, do the institution building and capacity building, and actually create all the programs and services that would meet those needs that were identified in the surveys.
Thank you, Chancey. Any other questions from the floor?